You have got to be kidding me. The voice, sharp and laced with youthful confidence, cut through the quiet hum of the parachute rigging facility. Lieutenant Parker, fresh from the Naval Academy and still carrying the shine of school polish, stood with his hands on his hips, a look of disbelief on his face. He gestured at a neatly packed parachute, then looked directly at the man who had packed it. I said I want a 2-inch margin on the log stitch, not a 2 1/4. Are you even listening to the morning briefings, or are you just here to collect a paycheck? Mr. Walter Morgan, who had been on this earth for 68 years, 55 of which had been in service to his country in one form or another, slowly finished his sip of black coffee from a thermos that had seen better decades. He placed it down with a quiet thud. He didn't look at the lieutenant. His gaze was fixed on the vast expanse of nylon spread across his packing table, a life-saving puzzle he'd solved thousands of times. His hands, aged but still possessing a surgeon's steadiness, rested on the table. He remained silent, like a rock in the stream of the young officer's complaints. The other riggers, a mix of civilian contractors and junior sailors, pretended to be busy. The sudden tension in the room was thick. Parker took the silence as defiance. I'm talking to you, old man. This is a SEAL team. We demand perfection. A 1/4 inch could be the difference between a clean insertion and a serious failure. Do you understand the stakes here? His voice rose, each word a small push, an attempt to get a reaction from the quiet figure before him. The young lieutenant's face was turning red. The silence from Mr. Morgan seemed to fuel his frustration, twisting it into a more personal attack. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a demeaning tone that was somehow louder than his previous shouting. Look at you. You're ancient. How did you even get this contract? Did you wander in off the street? This isn't a retirement home. This is naval special warfare. The men who use this equipment are warriors, the best of the best. They deserve to have their gear packed by professionals who can still see straight, not by some relic who should be in a rocking chair. A few of the younger sailors shuffled their feet uncomfortably. They knew the lieutenant was out of line, but he was still an officer, and they were at the bottom of the chain of command. The older contractors, men who had known Mr. Morgan for years, exchanged dark looks, their hands tightening on their tools. They'd seen this before. New officers, full of knowledge from school but with zero practical experience, would often mistake Mr. Morgan's quiet manner for incompetence. They saw an old man, slow and careful, and failed to see the lifetime of experience that guided his every move. Parker wasn't finished. He picked up Mr. Morgan's logbook, flipping through the pages dismissively. Each entry was a model of precision, written in neat handwriting that hadn't changed in 50 years. I'm going to be reviewing all your recent packs, Parker announced to the room as if he were a detective who had just cracked a case. Every single one starting now. If I find so much as a single thread out of place, I'll have your contract terminated and your access to this base removed permanently. He tossed the logbook back onto the table where it slid across the surface and knocked over Mr. Morgan's old thermos. Hot black coffee pooled across the table, creeping towards the pristine orange parachute. Before the liquid could touch the fabric, Mr. Morgan's hand shot out with speed that defied his age. He snatched the thermos, his movements quick and precise. Not a single drop touched the chute. He calmly took a rag from his pocket and began wiping up the spill, his expression unreadable. This calm was the final straw for Lieutenant Parker. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. He was trying to assert his authority, but the old man's calm refusal to be upset was making him look foolish. He needed to escalate, to find a weakness, to prove he was in charge. His eyes scanned Mr. Morgan, looking for any flaw. And then he saw it, a faded patch of ink barely visible above the collar of Mr. Morgan's workshirt. What is that? Parker sneered, pointing a finger at Mr. Morgan's neck. Some kind of old tattoo? You get that on leave back in the Stone Age? He laughed, a short, ugly sound. Let me guess. An anchor, a picture, something to remember, a cheap port and a bad decision. The lieutenant leaned in closer, a cruel smirk spreading across his face as he tried to get a better look at the tattoo. Mr. Morgan hadn't consciously thought about it in years, but the officer's words brought the memory back. It wasn't a needle in a modern parlor. It was a makeshift setup in the cramped confines of a submarine's torpedo room, deep beneath the cold waters of the North Atlantic. The man holding the needle was his brother, not by blood, but by a bond formed in chaos and shared risk. They were just young men then, part of a new experimental unit about to be launched from the torpedo tubes on a mission that had never been attempted. They all got the same tattoo that night, a small symbol on their necks, a trident. It was a mark of their silent pact, a promise that no matter what happened in the deep or the frozen land that awaited them, they were in it together. It was a symbol of a group that back then didn't even officially exist. The memory came back in a flash, a secret history marked into his skin that this young officer could never understand. Across the room, Senior Chief Petty Officer Jack Sullivan, a veteran rigger, watched the scene unfold with growing concern. He had been a rigger for 25 years and had worked alongside Mr. Morgan for the last 5. He knew Mr. Morgan not just as a master of his craft, but as a man who radiated a quiet, unshakable authority. Sullivan had seen officers like Parker before, and he knew this was going beyond a simple workplace dispute. Parker wasn't just disrespecting a civilian contractor. He was violating one of the Navy's most sacred unspoken rules. You respect your elders. You honor the quiet professionals who have forgotten more about your job than you will ever know. When Parker pointed at the tattoo on Mr. Morgan's neck, Sullivan felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He'd seen that faded ink before. He didn't know its specific origin, but he knew it was old school. It was from a different era of the teams, a time before the high-tech gear. It was a marker of the pioneers, the quiet figures who had written the book on naval special warfare. Parker was stepping on a landmine and had no idea. Sullivan couldn't intervene directly without making the situation worse, but he could not let it continue. He set down his tools with deliberate care, his movements slow and casual. He caught the eye of another senior contractor and gave a slight shake of his head, a silent signal to stay put. He then turned and walked towards the back offices. He entered a small supply office and quietly closed the door. He pulled out his personal cell phone. He didn't call base security or the department head. He knew that would just get stuck in bureaucracy. He needed someone who would understand what was happening, someone who understood the history. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the one he was looking for, the direct line to the office of the base commander, Captain Mitchell. He pressed the call button. The commander's aide, a young ensign, answered on the second ring. Captain Mitchell's office. This is Senior Chief Sullivan at the rigging facility, Jack said, his voice low and urgent. I need to speak with the captain. It's an emergency. There was a pause. The captain is in a secure briefing, Senior Chief. Can I take a message? With all due respect, Ensign, this can't wait. Tell him it concerns a civilian rigger named Walter Morgan. Sullivan paused, choosing his next words carefully. Tell him one of the new lieutenants is publicly berating Mr. Morgan on the packing floor. Tell him the lieutenant just made an issue of the old trident tattoo on Mr. Morgan's neck. The ensign was silent for a moment. Sullivan could hear faint keyboard clicks. Then the ensign's voice returned, the professional calm replaced by alarm. Stand by, Senior Chief. Inside the soundproof conference room, Captain James Mitchell was in the middle of a top-secret briefing. He was a man accustomed to immense pressure, a leader who had commanded men in harsh environments. His focus was absolute. That focus was shattered when his aide slipped into the room and placed a note in front of him. Mitchell glanced down, his eyes scanning the brief handwritten message. Urgent. Senior Chief Sullivan at rigging facility. L.T. Parker confronting civilian Walter Morgan. Made issue of neck tattoo. The captain's face went pale. The other officers in the room watched in confusion as the color drained from their commander's face. He stared at the note for a full 10 seconds, the name Walter Morgan seeming to leap off the page. He pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping against the floor. Gentlemen, this briefing is over, he announced, his voice a low growl that promised severe consequences for someone. I have a situation to attend to. He was on his feet and moving towards the door before his subordinates could even process the dismissal. He burst out of the conference room, his aide nearly having to run to keep up. Get my vehicle to the front entrance now, Mitchell commanded, and get Master Chief Carson. Tell him to meet me there immediately. The captain didn't wait for a reply. He was already striding down the hallway, his mind racing. Walter Morgan. Of all the people on his base, He was perhaps the one man who deserved nothing but the utmost respect. The one man whose quiet presence was a living link to the very origins of the brotherhood Mitchell now led. And some new lieutenant was harassing him. On his watch, it was unthinkable. Back on the rigging floor, Lieutenant Parker was basking in what he perceived as his victory. Mr. Morgan's continued silence and the nervous energy of the onlookers had convinced him that he had successfully asserted his dominance. To cement his authority, he decided it was time for the final blow. He pulled out his official notepad, clicking his pen with an obnoxious flourish. "All right, that's it. I'm writing you up, Morgan," he declared. "Insubordination, failure to follow protocol, and frankly, a demonstrated inability to perform your duties to the standards required by naval special warfare." He looked up from his pad, a smug grin on his face. "I'm recommending your immediate termination and a full review of your security clearance. I'm not even sure how you got it in the first place." He took a step towards Mr. Morgan and reached out, intending to snatch the contractor ID clipped to his shirt. "Give me your badge. You are officially relieved of your duties. I will personally escort you to the gate." This was the ultimate overreach. A junior officer attempting to fire and physically remove a senior civilian employee. A gross abuse of his limited authority. The first sound was a distant siren, a faint wail that grew steadily louder, closer. Then came the screech of tires on pavement. The wide bay doors of the rigging facility were thrown open, and a black command vehicle skidded to a halt just outside, its lights flashing. It was followed by two security trucks, which boxed in the entrance. The entire facility froze. Conversation stopped. Work ceased. Everyone turned to stare as the doors of the command vehicle flew open. Out stepped Captain Mitchell. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was followed by the highest-ranking enlisted man on the entire base, Fleet Master Chief Carson, a man whose gaze could make officers tremble. They moved with purpose that scattered sailors out of their path. Their eyes scanned the room, ignoring everyone until they locked onto the scene at Mr. Morgan's workstation. They saw the young lieutenant, his hands still outstretched towards the old man's chest, a look of utter confusion on his face. They saw Mr. Morgan standing as still and solid as an ancient tree, his expression unbothered. The spectacle of the sudden high-level arrival was stunning, a full-force display of command authority that the facility had never witnessed. Captain Mitchell strode across the floor, his boots echoing in the now deafening silence. He walked right past Lieutenant Parker as if he were a piece of furniture, his eyes fixed solely on Walter Morgan. He stopped 3 feet in front of Mr. Morgan, his back ramrod straight. The entire room held its breath. Then something extraordinary happened. Captain Mitchell, the commander of the entire naval base, a man who held the careers and lives of thousands in his hands, snapped his heels together and brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. "Master Chief Morgan," Mitchell said, his voice ringing with deep and profound respect that stunned every single person present. "It is an honor to have you on my base, sir." The title hung in the air. Master Chief, not a contractor, not an old man, a Master Chief. Parker's face went white. He dropped his hand as if it had been burned. Master Chief Carson moved to stand beside his captain, and he too gave a salute, his gaze locked on Mr. Morgan. Mitchell held his salute, waiting. After a moment, Mr. Morgan slowly, almost reluctantly raised his eyes from the parachute on his table and met the captain's gaze. He gave a slight, acknowledging nod. Mitchell finally dropped his hand. He turned to face the assembled crowd of riggers and sailors, his eyes blazing. "For those of you who do not know," the captain began, his voice a low, controlled roar, "this man, Mr. Walter Morgan, is not just a parachute rigger. This is Master Chief Petty Officer Walter Morgan, retired. He was one of the founding members of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group. You call it SEAL Team 6. A collective gasp went through the room. The name was legendary, a unit spoken of only in hushed, reverent tones. Parker looked like he was going to be physically ill. Mitchell continued, his voice like rolling thunder, reciting a history that had been sealed in classified documents for decades. Master Chief Morgan served 30 years in the teams. He was a pioneer of high-altitude, low-opening parachute techniques, the very techniques you all use today. He conducted operations in difficult places all over the world, long before any of you were born. He is the recipient of the Navy Cross. He has 2 silver stars and 5 bronze stars for valor. The tattoo on his neck that was so casually mocked today is a plank owner's trident, a mark given only to the original members of DevGru, a band of brothers who defined what it means to be a Tier 1 operator. He doesn't work here for the money. He works here because he made a promise that he would spend his life making sure that every single parachute that goes out that door is perfect. He has dedicated his life to protecting the men who follow in his footsteps. Mitchell paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling upon the trembling Lieutenant Parker. "This man," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "is a living legend, and he is to be given the respect that he has earned 1,000 times over." The captain's gaze remained locked on Lieutenant Parker. The young officer was visibly shaking, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Lieutenant," Captain Mitchell began, his voice deceptively calm, "you are an officer in the United States Navy. You hold the President's commission. You are entrusted with the leadership and welfare of sailors and the solemn duty to uphold the honor of this uniform." He took a step closer. "And you just used your authority to belittle and threaten a man whose boots you are not worthy to polish. You did not see a Master Chief. You did not see a hero. You saw an old man. And in your arrogance and your ignorance, you decided he was worthless. You have not only failed as a leader, you have failed as a man. You have brought shame upon this command and upon your commission." He turned to Master Chief Carson. "Master Chief, escort this officer to my office. He will wait there for me. His career in naval special warfare is over." Carson nodded grimly and gestured for Parker to move. The lieutenant, utterly broken, turned and walked away like a man in a trance. As the small group departed, a heavy silence returned to the room. Walter Morgan finally spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying easily through the space. "Captain," he said, not with anger, but with weary sadness. "The boy is young. He's full of fire, but his aim is off." Mitchell turned back to Mr. Morgan, his expression softening. "He made a mistake, Master Chief. A big one." Mr. Morgan nodded slowly, picking up the rag and giving the table one last wipe. "We've all made mistakes, Captain. The important thing is whether we learn from them. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Maybe this will be his fire. Teach him. Don't just break him." It was a lesson delivered with grace and humility from a man who had seen true hardship and had no need for revenge. As Mr. Morgan spoke, the image of that needle flashed in his mind again. But this time, the memory was clearer. He saw the faces of the other young men in that torpedo room, all of them impossibly young, all of them scared but unwilling to show it. The tattoo wasn't a mark of showing off. It was a physical reminder of a promise. It was about their shared vulnerability and their absolute reliance on one another. The man who had wielded the needle, a teammate named Eric, had looked him in the eye and said, "No matter what, we go together. We come back together." Eric hadn't come back from that mission. Mr. Morgan's life, his quiet work at this table, was a tribute to that promise. He was still here, ensuring the next generation came back together. The results for Lieutenant Parker were swift and decisive. He was formally reassigned to a desk job at a remote logistics command, a place known as a career dead end. A letter of reprimand was permanently placed in his file, ensuring he would never be promoted again. But Captain Mitchell took Mr. Morgan's words to heart. Before Parker was transferred, he was ordered to attend a new training program that was immediately implemented on the base, a mandatory seminar for all junior officers on the history of the SEAL teams, with a special focus on the contributions of its veterans and the importance of respecting the civilian support staff. Weeks later, Mr. Morgan was at a small, off-base coffee shop reading a newspaper. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked a subdued-looking Parker, now dressed in civilian clothes. He saw Mr. Morgan, hesitated for a moment, then walked over to his table. "Sir," he began, his voice quiet and stripped of all its former arrogance. I wanted to apologize for my behavior. There's no excuse for it. I was wrong." Mr. Morgan slowly folded his newspaper and looked up at the young man. He saw not an arrogant officer, but a humbled one, a man who had perhaps begun his journey through the fire. "Have a seat, son," Mr. Morgan said, gesturing to the empty chair. Parker sat down, And for the next hour, Walter Morgan, the quiet hero, talked to him. He didn't talk about war or secret missions. He talked about service, about humility, and about the quiet dignity of a life spent in dedication to others.